I'm Alice McKenzie, and welcome to this episode of What's a Preacher to Do? Preaching in a Pandemic of Racism. Today, my guest is Dr. Ron Allen, and he is Professor of Preaching and Gospel and Letters Emeritus at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis. So thanks for being with us today, Dr. Allen. You would barely know that Ron is retired. He continues to be a prolific author and teacher of preaching, and in retirement continues to work with groups of preachers around the country. And we have one key question for you, and that is, what is one key piece of advice for preachers crafting sermons in such a time as this, in need of racial justice?
Well, thank you, Alice. If I could put it into one sentence, I would say to think about the sermon not only from the perspective of what I as the preacher want to say, but especially also from the perspective of how the sermon is going to be received and processed by the listener. And toward this end, we did a study at CTS a few years ago of people who listen to sermons, trying to probe into what happens when a sermon falls on the ear and the heart of the listener. And I think the single biggest surprise to come out of this study was the discovery that more than 90% of the people whom we interviewed, and they numbered about 250 interviews, more than 90% of the people whom we interviewed said that they would like for the preacher to talk about important social issues, hot button issues. I mention this because I know when I was in a local pastorate and I hear preachers talk along these same lines now, just hesitant to bring up a topic like racial justice, especially when there are so many electric media lines on it right now. It's really important for me to name my own feelings and attitudes around preaching on racial justice. And I'm thinking here mainly of a Eurocentric preacher in a congregation that is made up mainly of Eurocentric people. I would be remarkably hesitant to say anything in an advisory way to preachers in African American settings. But I think a lot of preachers are probably like me. I have a gamut of responses when I think about talking about race in the pulpit, especially in a time of ferment, such as the one that we're having now, with so many different kinds of media images coming at us. There is fear, there is hesitation, there is bewilderment, there is a sense of hope, there is a sense of prophetic demand, there is the sense that this is a remarkable moment in our culture, and how dare I as a preacher miss it by remaining silent. And I think a preacher who could name these things in a sensitive way would find not that they put off many in the congregation, but that they become points of connection, that many people, Eurocentric people in the congregation, probably feel along these ways themselves.
Now, what about moving people toward hope, giving them a sense of hope, because that's sometimes missing in the way people are feeling now?
Alice, I think you've put your finger on something very important. It is, of course, absolutely essential that we Eurocentric people name and repent of our racism. But one reason we might want to do that is for the benefit that it would bring not only to ourselves, but to the larger culture. I think people are motivated to change and to action more by the sense of possibility and hope than they are by the sense of judgment and condemnation and the need to repent. And as a process theologian, I'm committed to the idea that all people are inherently connected. So the situation of the African American community at some deep level is connected to our experience, and our experience is connected to the experience of that community. And when we can move toward a world of greater mutuality, dignity, freedom, opportunity, abundance for all, then it's not as if something is taken away from one and given to another. The whole rope is tightened and the whole lift is more powerful.
Huh. So I'm thinking in terms of what I know about your family. I know that you have two African American daughters.
Yes.
Are there things about that being in a transracial family that inform the way that you would preach for racial justice?
Yes. My wife and I have 5 children, 3 by birth, 2 by adoption. The 2 by adoption are African American young women, ages 30 and 34 now. The point at which their experience and our experience as a family informs my preaching is to give actual experiential authority to things like young people being picked up while driving while black, being followed in the store, in one case being videotaped and taken to the store manager's office and accused of theft when that was not even taking place. One of our daughters played Division I soccer at a university that was a really welcoming university, but practically the only African Americans were in the athletic program. And so there was a kind of sense of segregation there. And what this has given me is a greater sense of empathy and a greater sense of urgency, that these are not just things we see on the news. These are things that happen to real people. And this is also a point at which the internal connection of our daughters and ourselves has really provided a spark for energy, that we need a different kind of social relationship among people of color and Eurocentric peoples today.
Thank you so much for those general insights and those more autobiographical insights as well. You can see Dr. Allen's bio and a list of his publications, which is lengthy. He's a very prolific and enriching author in our field, on our Perkins Center for Preaching Excellence website. And his current book project is entitled You Never Step into the Same Pulpit Twice, Preaching from the Perspective of Process Theology. Thank you for being our guest today, Ron. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alice.
And viewers, be on the lookout for our next episode of What's a Preacher to Do?